reading all of our instructions, taking our survey seriously and not just clicking through. So this inspired a lot of response from workers, and we got some emails from this. And the emails fell into what I would like to think of as two main camps. So we would reply and let them know if they were not understanding why their work had been rejected. I would say, well, we had this attention checking item. We asked you to select enthusiastic 3 times and explain to them by email what we were making our decision based on. And so one response that I got was, what do you mean my responses weren't enthusiastic enough to your items? And so this is something that made sense in retrospect, but people were very upset and thought that they weren't giving us long enough open-ended answers, or something was wrong with the quality of their data to other, or their responses to other items. The other type of response I got was a little more angry, and it was along the lines of, I'll be in contact with your IRB, Clemson psychology is a horrible requester on MTurk, you guys are being unethical and unfair, and you're stealing our data and getting away with free data. So these were responses that concerned us, and we did also get some responses that were not sent to us directly. So there are, as I mentioned, requesters get a reputation too. So there are review sites, kind of like Rate My Professor, where requesters get rated. So we had, as you might imagine, some really low ratings, some pretty mean comments. People are mean on the internet. So we had a lot of feedback from workers that this attention checking item was super unfair. It made it seem unethical. It made it seem like we were stealing their data. So we were concerned about this. And this also, not only from a fair treatment standpoint, but this also affected our participant pool. So if we're making some workers angry and they're being vocal about that with other workers, then we're not going to have participants in the future. So this is concerning for a number of reasons. So I want to talk to you guys about possible solutions and then what we did as a solution for this study. But like before, there's some constraints or things we want to consider with this. So we do want to have a solution that helps us maintain the quality of our data. Since we are paying participants and it is online and we're not monitoring them in any way, we want to make sure that we're getting high quality data that we're paying for. But we also want to make sure our workers are happy with us and that we're not ruining our own reputation as researchers and harming our participant pool or contaminating our pool. So I'm going to talk to you guys about solutions. So what are some thoughts or questions you guys have about what we could do in this case where we're making workers upset with our attention checking item? They did. That wasn't the informed consent, and it did also say that we would reject their work on the basis of those items.
Was it like in a long-term condition statement, or was it like a short snippet?
It was in our informed consent, and we have, I don't remember if it was the case for this one, but we have before highlighted that in our informed consent when we posted it on our survey so that they see that. But that's something.
Is that something that most people are going to read?
So I actually just went to a talk at a psychology conference last week where they had an interesting study where they had experimented with different informed consent formats, and their findings were that none of the formats seemed to make a difference, and it wasn't that people were reading the details of those forms. My impression is that MTurk workers seem to take them more seriously, because I have had those comments where people say, I'm going to contact your IRB, I saved that informed consent, I'll follow up with them, I'll follow up with the name of your principal investigator. So my impression is that they do, but I'm not sure that it's a large percentage. It's a really good question, though.
Are the consequences lined out? Like, for instance, if you tell them that if you don't reply enthusiastic, you won't be held from survey or something like that?
Well, so the informed consent would just say that they're attention checking items in general, and it wouldn't say what the correct response is there in the informed consent. But that was what I tried to explain in the email where I got that response then of, well, what do you mean? I wasn't enthusiastic enough. Yep, so they wouldn't be told the correct answer beforehand, but they would be told that there are some items that would have those correct answers.
So the question that comes to mind for me is when they say you're stealing my data,
Yeah.
I assume that any of the
Yes, that is a great question about stealing the data. So this is something I see as a valid concern from the perspective of the worker. If I do your whole survey, you say for whatever reason you're not happy with it, but then you still have my response saved. So for us, that anytime they failed an attention checking item, we took that as an indicator that it was low quality data, so we definitely did not use that. But yeah, that's something I definitely see as a valid point from the perspective of workers.
You said, like, before they would begin, giving information, they had to sign or agree to, like,
Right.
Okay. Is it presented at all like that when honor code? Because, I mean, I was in I'm in an ethics class and we once looked over like a research paper on how, like, people were far less likely to cheat or,
Oh,
do
right.
anything of poor behavior if they were reminded of morals in some way, and honor code was one of the ways they did it. They wasn't used for other
Right.
stuff, but they concluded that honors code or honor codes reminded either like dissuaded people from making that kind of rash behavior because
Yeah, to motivate them with, so to remind them of morals or why we're doing research on MTurk. We have had indications in informed consents or in emails when I've responded to upset workers to say that we do this because we're trying to collect high quality data, but we don't have anything in place like that where they read like an ethical statement or give any indication like that as a participant in the study, unless they were to follow up with me by email. Then I would try to explain why we're doing this. We're not doing this just to be mean, but so that we can have high quality data. I also think, as far as incentives to respond well, if they know that they're going to not get paid based on their responses to those items, and I think that would be another motivator you have to think about. So that could maybe be, with the honor code on a test, maybe that would be similar to the grade being dependent on cheating or not cheating through the test. So it's a little bit different, but I think that would be a good motivator, having that pay be dependent on that.
the study was referencing, they didn't pay the participants based on the correctness of their answers.
Oh, wow.
And like that is like performing like tests using like math matrices. It was kind of like good potential to cheat. They designed it where, some ways there was easier ways to cheat than
Yeah.
others. And some of the tests they had honors codes, some of the tests, the question material we got like the 10 commandments, and then some would just be like the normal control groups. And
Yeah.
even with money as an incentive, they talked about, or like the researchers about that they included that a reminder of morals tend to like be a value in itself of the participants, and so it has some degree of effectiveness.
Yeah.
I thought that's why I thought it would apply to this. They actually pay the participants,
Right.
but for whatever reason, moral values held as a value of its own to a degree.
That's a really cool thing to follow up on, because I think that's the issue with paying them. Because they say that a worker is hurrying through several different surveys. If they get through more surveys, they get paid more. So it's kind of like getting more items right on that test. So there is that motivation to go through as quickly as possible, but not miss those items. Wow, that is cool. That's a cool study. Did you have a comment up here?
I was just going to say, like, the example you showed, the attention check was like the very end, the very long, very dry paragraph, whereas like the bubble chart is a quick 4-word sentence.
Yeah.
I think I would probably have done that and not gotten accepted. Other than that, like, those 3 words in the paragraph, what did it look like? I got the idea from the first 2 sentences.
Right. I am so glad you brought that up. So he mentioned that we have this long paragraph, and if I get the point of this section of questions from the first couple of sentences, then why did it matter that I skipped the last 2 sentences if I understood what I was supposed to be doing? And that's something we've talked about in our lab a lot. Are there different types of attention checking items where you could be paying enough attention to get this high quality data, but miss those items? So I think that's a really great point. I don't know that I have the answer to that, but that's something we've had some really good discussions about. Like, could we be getting high quality data, but then have people miss those items? And is this the best way to check before paying attention or check the quality of our data. Okay, so I'll talk about what our solution was for this particular one. So we had participants in our study still doing the same survey. We did move up our attention checking items, so they were sooner in the survey, and so they were spending less time on the survey before they got to the attention checking items. And then if they missed them, they would be shown this page immediately after. So if they didn't select enthusiastic, we showed them the same instructions there, and this seemed to be a better way to explain our study, because then people didn't get the, what do you mean I was supposed to pick enthusiastic, I don't understand. So this, we just highlighted that part of our paragraph there at the end that indicated that they should be selecting certain options. And then, as I mentioned, workers have the option to submit the hit or return it. So we did instruct them at this point to return the hit so that we wouldn't have to reject their work. So we moved it up sooner, we explained it better, and this seemed to have some good effect on our data.
Is there any evidence that participants feel like they're being compelled to give an answer to the question that they think will be counted? Whereas, so for instance,
What do you mean by that?
like with that one email, it sounded like that participant seemed convinced that you wanted a particular answer out of him.
So maybe like if I ask about your experiences at work, I want to know that they were positive rather than whatever they really were.
Or that you were compelling him to give a particular answer to that one part of the, like, was it detailed that that part of the survey wasn't being considered as a possible survey question, or was it?
So for the attention checking item that we had, this one was not data that we were using. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, but was that
Yeah.
participant informed about that?
It's been a couple of years ago. I would hope that they got that from my email, but that's something, having that better explanation, I think, was what really made the difference. Like, this is just here to check whether you're paying attention, rather than to find out if you'd really be enthusiastic if this bad thing happened to you at work.
Yeah, so just like as a suggestion, maybe saying, in addition to what you had there, in addition to selecting enthusiastic for all three, you could add, we're not going to consider this part of the study.
Yeah, right, so this isn't gonna count against you if you try to really answer this.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and so hopefully that would, if they're reading all of the instructions, they would get that there's this sort of false purpose of this part of the study, and then this is the real purpose, is to see if you're reading our entire instructions on every page. Yeah, that's a really good point though, because I do want our workers to understand why we're doing this and what our purpose is with these attention checking items. So I think having a better explanation and having it sooner and happen in the survey before they submit the work was something that really worked for us in this study. But I also wanted to talk about some other solutions that we've used in different studies. So this is something that we're still feeling out in our lab, and so different studies have had some different attention checking items or different approaches to this. So we have had a lot of the easier seeming attention checking items where we have one item mixed in with others in the survey. There are some where we've had no attention checking item, and we've made that decision on the basis of either the length of the survey. So if it's a really short survey, if it's 1 or 2 pages, it can almost be seen as offensive to workers if you have a lot of attention checking items in that. Like, we don't trust them to give us good enough data on a really short survey. And we've done some other studies where we've had what I would think of as a more engaging topic, and again, it's almost offensive to put in those attention checking items in those. Like, we did one after this study, and this response, this inspired some research. Like any good researcher, we came up with more questions than answers from a study, and we asked workers about their experiences working on MTurk. So that was one where we thought workers would be more engaged, and this is something that they would take sort of personally. So we didn't have attention checking items in that survey, because again, it's not perceived the same way as we think it would as researchers be perceived. Other things we've done are to take the attention checking item in our survey and just clean our data after paying everyone. So we've done that before as well. So anybody that completes our survey and gives us our completion code at the end gets paid, and then we clean our data afterwards. And that's something we've had varying levels of success with depending on your sample. So if you have international samples, that seems to give you a little bit more problematic data that you throw out. But with US samples, that seems to actually not cause that many problems in your data. And then you have satisfied workers and you end up with a good large data set where people were paying attention. But overall, I think back to our participant pool, a lot of research requires you to coordinate and balance a lot of different things. So you want to be a good steward of your research funding and spend it on data that's high quality. You want to make sure that you're fair and ethical to your participants. You want to be fair, think about what you can afford, and balance all of these with your studies. And as I've mentioned, this has changed a little bit over time, and we've tried some different approaches. So our synchronized swimming routine does not always look the same, but we're still balancing those same issues in our research. Thank you, and I'd love to have the rest of the time for questions.
I have a question. If you all also use attention checking questions in some of the subject pool research you do?
We do, but we don't reject any of them. So yeah, in the subject pool research, nobody gets turned away. And in fact, that's been part of our ethos with the alternative research tests for the students in intro psychology. The questions for that, don't listen if you're currently in 201, but the questions in that are ridiculously easy. Every time I've had a new grad student come on to help me manage that, the grad student is all excited about being a grad student and asks really good critical thinking questions about the article, and I'm like, no. They need to be things like the participants in this study were 52 gorillas, 18 undergraduates, 72 firefighters, or 14 nursing mothers. You know, like really, like you should know what the answer is. So yeah, we, as part of the research participant experience, what they're getting credit for is being exposed to research, as opposed to being paid for good work. And I think that's what the difference is. So,
well, and that's something, so
yeah.
This is a really good question that I've had discussions with other researchers about, because we have all of this concern about our data from MTurk. Is it high quality? And there's lots of publications on this and comparing undergraduate pool samples with MTurk samples. And the critique or the argument back towards the participant pool is that we don't use attention checking items, or we don't use them to make any sort of decision on participation. And so is it, you know, is it a data quality issue there? So it's a really good question.
And I did just complete a study where we had MTurk data and data from college students here. And we left the attention check, everybody completed the attention check items. We just didn't make decisions about that for the undergrads.
I wonder if, and the reason I asked was, I wonder if since those participants you also see in person, if it might be
That's a good point.
helpful or interesting for the folks that you do see in person that didn't answer the attention checking questions correctly, then form a sort of focus group of those folks. Maybe even reject, not give them credit,
Yeah.
but form a focus group of those folks.
Yeah.
And then try to get at some of the motivational things you were talking about, Alice.
Yeah.
And you can't really pull that group of workers together and ask them, you know, would you respond better to this or this? Would you have understood this more if I explained it this way or
Right.
That's a really good idea. That's
do
a really
think that's
good idea.
some data to help other folks.
Yeah.
That you can publish
Yeah.
to help other researchers that are
Now,
using this tool.
one of the issues with that would be that we would have to make sure, it would need to be a study that we are not promising confidentiality, because when we promise confidentiality, we make sure we don't get that. But yeah, I mean, it would, but that is a really interesting
I
idea.
think that could work on MTurk
Yeah.
too, though.
I think
if you
so,
had
yeah.
a follow-up study, and you would have a little bit more confidentiality because they have random worker IDs as opposed to their identity, and you could do some kind of online focus group with that.
Or even just an open-ended online questionnaire,
Yeah.
you know, saying, you know, you failed our attention check, we'd like to know a little bit, and we'd like to get your responses to these different attention checking items and what you were doing at the time.
yeah.
And it could just be open-ended. And it wouldn't even have to be a focus group. It
Right.
could just be open-ended respond to
I
stuff.
think
That's
in
a good
general,
idea.
too, anytime you treat workers like humans, so even though you're not interacting with them face to face, anytime you say, like when we did the survey where we asked about working on MTurk, and we had an informed consent, that was our standard letter, and we also had a little bit of information where I wrote, hey, we messed up before, like we upset a lot of workers, and so we're doing this to follow up and ask about this experience. And so that was one where we got that really positive response from workers and a lot of engagement. So I think that's something that they would actually respond pretty positively to if you frame it in the right way. That's a cool idea.
That is cool.
Right. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great option,
that is a good
especially
option.
for that online format to have
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That'd be-
Yeah, that
that's
is
a good
really
idea.
cool.
Yeah. Well, and then I know that we've also set up within the lab some of the hits that we've set up. Say it says right in the hit advertisement, it says, this is a research study that contains attention checking items. You will not be paid if you do not answer correctly. So it's right there on the thing that they click to sign up for it. So hopefully with it being shorter and right up front like that as the description, we catch them with that too. But yeah, we always, more information is good.
And that's something I mentioned where we've tried to highlight that, so anything that we really want them to know you're getting paid, but you're not getting paid if you miss these items. And we have highlighted that, but we haven't had them do any extra items for their comprehension of that.
Do the attention checks vary with the kind of questions that you're asking?
Yes.
To go back to the example that was up there, I mean, would something like that be especially appropriate if they were to be given a set of questions that involved a very careful look at a scenario or a short narrative?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. So I was thinking in terms of the content, because these were in a bunch of items about your workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought like they fit with the content of the workplace, but you're thinking more fit with the process of what we're asking them to do.
Yeah, like
Makes even more sense. Yeah.
A bunch of short questions and short attention checks, but on the other
Yeah.
hand,
Right.
I mean, that would seem like a great attention check in the event that they're supposed to take a careful look and consider a short narrative or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
Well,
That's a
so
good idea.
I have done very few studies on MTurk with narrative, like maybe a news story or a short blurb that you want them to read, but I have seen other researchers' hits where they have an attention check that is in the narrative format and it matches the type of tasks they're having them do, like read a news story and respond, or read some blurb and get information out of it or respond to that. So that's a good question. I mean, because this was one, that particular example was one, the attention checking item was of a different format than the rest of the items, as far as I recall. So they were mostly rate on a scale were our main survey items that we were interested in. And then the attention check was, I believe, the only narrative item. And then there was an open-ended item. So there was some variety, but it didn't match like our core task. That's a good question.
That's a real good point.
And that, I think, goes back to that point of why does it matter if I got the point from the first couple of sentences? And that's something we're still talking about in the lab. Like, is it?
Yeah.
I want to do so many follow-up studies now.
Well, and we had what would amount to an accuracy check that was built into another study that was describe a time you acted courageously. How long ago was this action? How old were you at the time? And then at the end we asked them how old they were. And so we weren't going to reject any work based on this, but we were thinking about throwing out bad data based on that. But on the other hand, after looking at them and reading the answers, it's actually a little bit hard to tell because, you know, when I put this talk together, I was like, and I've been the manager of the participant pool for, I think, 10 years? I don't know. I just had to sort of take a guess. And so you want to make sure that you that the attention check items really are things that are crystal clear and that are not these ambiguous sort of things that people might just be wrong about. It's not that they're not paying attention to what you've asked them to do, it's that it's a thing that requires a skill and you're seeing if they have the skill or not. And so, yeah, we don't want to do that.
And that's even come up with those items like I have never brushed my teeth. That was,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time thinking and researching around to see if that could be a cultural thing, and is that something that we would have one response to here in the US and that I would know, but that could vary across different cultures. So that's something to think about. Even with those items that we think are simple and have one answer, it could be that they estimate incorrectly, or they have a truly different response to that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Has there been any work done, researching if a more active agreement that should like typing into a box, I acknowledge my intention will be checked later on as you're starting the survey. Is anyone trying to
Oh,
maybe that would
That's
tie into the
yeah.
sort of the writing the ethics statement on the test. So in that study that we were talking about earlier, was that one where they wrote a statement on the test, or they agreed to something?
Yeah, I think they had to sign their name. Like,
Okay.
I agree
Yeah.
to understand or something.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, though, the survey platform that we use, Qualtrics, to present all of this data, if you close a survey in Qualtrics, you can't just click boxes. You have to literally do exactly what you said and type in close, or it won't close on you. And if you're going to delete something, you have to put in delete and type that in. So they're doing an attention check because I'm guessing that at some point somebody sent angry emails to whoever developed something like this saying, why did you delete all my data? So we could do this.
Done.
We could do the same thing.
Yeah. And
We
have
could
that
do the
end.
same thing with the attention checks, or with acknowledging that there's attention checks.
Right.
Right.
And have them actively do it rather than like just click
Yeah.
this box and get through.
Yeah.
Like I think of
They
that
won't
like
know
terms
about
of
it.
service, you need to update your phone. I
Right.
agree to whatever you're telling me. Instead of like having to type in, yes,
Yeah.
I agree, I understand that you're saving some of my data, or
Right.
whatever it is that's going on that I'm agreeing to. So having that more active response. And I think too that gets to the idea of informed consent, because we want people to understand what they're getting themselves into and not just skim the form and hit next or hit agree.
Yeah, I know I've had that in informed consent forms before where there was some particular thing I wanted to make sure participants really knew, and it was a paper informed consent, but we had a separate little box where people had to read the separate little box and sign their name on the separate little box.
We had one like that with the texting study.
That was the study.
Yep.
Okay, yep. Because we wanted to acknowledge that they would not answer our text messages while they were driving.
So that was one where it was really high stakes, and we don't want people to be responding to our study while they're driving down the road.
Yeah.
So we did have that separate response.
Yeah.
So maybe we could think of it like that, where
Yeah.
if say you're paying a lot for a particular hit, maybe we could think of that like high stakes, and if you submit this, you're not getting the money and you're getting that rejection on your approval rate. So we could think of it like that.
And another thing that I've heard tale of at another institution is needing to make sure that you tell participants in AMT especially that they can only do this once, because I can review any number of receipts for you, and actually the more receipts I review for you, probably the better I am at it and the better off that's going to be. So if you don't state clearly you can only do this once, people want to do it again and again. And if you don't state that, you actually have to pay them to do it again and again. I know someone at a different institution who used up a lot of her dissertation funds because that wasn't in her informed consent, and this person took this, who wasn't even qualified to take the survey, took it again and again. And the answer was she needed to pay the person, and it was a costly survey. So you need to be, like you said, a good steward of your research funds. So, yeah, I guess that would be our summary message. Make sure people know what they're getting into and treat them nicely. The end.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks again to Dr. Cynthia Pury
and Alice Brawley. And I do want to mention that this has been videotaped and will be up on YouTube at the Rutland Institute YouTube channel in about 24 hours. Thank you.